The observatory was older than the nation that had launched it, older even than some of the languages still spoken on Earth. Officially, it was known as Veda Array Station 19, a relic from humanity's first interstellar outreach, a time when telescopes were still revered more than warships, and the galaxy was thought of as an infinite library of light, just waiting to be read. Unofficially, its sole remaining occupant simply called it the Eye. The satellite drifted in eternal orbit around a rogue planet, an orphan world without a sun, cast adrift through deep space. There were no seasons here, no days, no weather, only the cold kiss of background radiation and the infinite stretch of stars beyond. Ironically, the absence of a local sun made the location perfect for high-fidelity stellar monitoring. No light pollution, no gravitational noise, just silence, clarity, and sky. The narrator, Dr. Elian Rowe, astrophysicist and veteran interstellar surveyor, had volunteered for this post long before humanity's expansion reached the outer arm. He had spent nearly 4 decades aboard the Eye, watching the galactic disk like a monk attending the flickering flames of some cosmic temple. His was a life of observation, routine, and reverence. He logged variable star phases, tracked stellar drift, catalogued pulsar beats like a composer, transcribing the music of the spheres. But something had changed. It began subtly, as all impossible things do. A star here, a system there, small anomalies dismissed as observational glitches or data corruption. A bright blue-white main sequence star in Sector 191b had dropped in luminosity by 40% over a single week, then simply disappeared from the record. An ancient red giant, visible since humanity's earliest deep sky surveys, went dim as if someone had thrown a shroud across it. No nova, no supernova, no trace elements of hydrogen or carbon dispersing into the void, just gone. Elian ran diagnostics, cross-checked archival baselines, resynced with both the Lagrange observatories and the TRAPPIST relay grid. Nothing explained it, and the incidents were multiplying. At first, he'd kept the logs dry, clinical. Stellar anomaly, luminosity drop, reclassification required. But as weeks passed, the language shifted. The cold objectivity of science began to melt beneath something he hadn't felt since childhood: fear. These weren't random flukes. These weren't stars burning out naturally. They were vanishing, without trace, without sound, as if the sky were being erased. And still, the galaxy spun on, its silence more profound now, more personal. Stars blinked out like eyes closing in sleep, or resignation, or dread. Elian began to dream, not of equations or diagrams, but of the stars themselves, screaming in a language he couldn't understand as they slipped one by one into darkness. Sometimes he would wake up to find the observation room bathed in flickering light from a star that had just disappeared. The telemetry would be empty, the monitor black, and he would sit there, alone, staring at where it had once been, unable to remember its name. When Earth finally responded, the message was short. Others were noticing. Alarm was spreading through the core worlds. Telescopes across multiple systems were reporting synchronized data. Stars were vanishing across the Sagittarius arm, and now the phenomenon was beginning to spread inward. Veda Station 17 had gone silent. Contact lost. No debris, no distress signal, nothing. They asked Elian to keep recording, to remain vigilant. But behind the directive was something unspoken. A hope that the oldest eyes in the sky might see what no one else could. So he watched, and the sky grew darker. By the time the 100th star had vanished, he stopped logging coordinates. He knew this wasn't a scientific anomaly anymore. It was a message The stars were leaving. The human brain is wired to find patterns, even where none exist. It's a survival mechanism, an echo from the savannah, where recognizing the glint of predator eyes in a tangle of leaves could mean the difference between life and death. For Dr. Elian Rowe, pattern recognition was more than instinct. It was vocation. His entire career had been built on sifting through chaos to find the secret rhythms of the cosmos. But the pattern he was beginning to see now wasn't something to be celebrated. The stars were not vanishing at random. The first hint came while reviewing archival comparisons. Elian overlaid vanishing coordinates across a galactic topographic map, plotting each dimmed system in sequence. At first, the scatter looked random, but when filtered for time and stellar class, a clear progression began to emerge. Subtle, deliberate, curved. Not a ring, not a sphere, a wave. The stars were going dark in an arc, beginning at the edge of the galactic rim, sweeping slowly inward like an invisible scythe. Entire regions of space, once dense with stellar light, were now hollow voids, and those voids were expanding. Worse, the sequence followed a direction. It moved, not outward, not away, inward, toward the galactic core, toward Earth. It wasn't just the movement, it was the tempo. Elian measured the intervals between each disappearance and found consistency. Not perfect, but enough to suggest intentionality. Not destruction, but traversal. Like something massive was passing through the galaxy and snuffing out the stars in its path. No shock waves, no radiation, no gravitational anomalies, just a kind of growing absence. The metaphor that came to him, unbidden and unwanted, was that of footsteps, slow, immeasurable, but walking. Earth's astrophysical community erupted in panic. Conference feeds turned into shouting matches. Old rivalries evaporated in the face of shared dread. Theories bloomed like wildfire, each more outlandish than the last. Dark energy anomalies, fourth-dimensional gravity leaks, even cosmic-scale extinction weapons. None of them fit. The voids weren't chaotic. They weren't noisy. They were patient. And then came the transmissions. It started with a relay node stationed in the Perseus fracture, one of the last observation outposts before the blackout region. The signal was garbled, the audio ruptured by static, but what made it through chilled Elian to his marrow. A voice, calm but shaken, repeating one sentence in 6 languages. The light is retracting. A day later, another signal. This time from a deep space habitat orbiting the neutron star MZX-4A. It lasted only 12 seconds. Screams, shouting, then a whisper through the noise. The curtain is falling. The messages came faster after that. Short, panicked fragments. Not official reports, but last transmissions. People facing the dark and saying what they could before silence claimed them. Some were scientific, others were prayer, but all of them carried the same underlying realization. This wasn't a cosmic accident. This was movement, a direction, a sweep, as though something vast and unseen were combing through the galaxy like fingers through tall grass, methodical, unhurried, unstoppable. Elian could feel it now. Not physically, but in the way a sailor senses the pressure change before a storm, or how animals go still when something ancient stirs in the earth. The stars weren't flickering out. They were stepping aside. Something was coming. And Earth, bright and blind, and so sure of its place in the cosmos, lay directly in its path. It was on the outer rim of the blacked-out zone, a place once brimming with stellar nurseries and high-energy quasars, where the telescope aboard the orbital observatory caught something it shouldn't have. At first, It registered as a glitch, an absence of background radiation too perfect, too geometrically uniform to be natural. The computer flagged it as a dead pixel in the lens array. Elian dismissed it, but the shape persisted. He magnified the coordinates. Again. And there it was. Not a star, not a planet, not a black hole. A shape. A curve so vast it bent perspective. A dark line crossing the stellar field, but not blocking the stars behind it. Instead, they seemed to vanish when they neared its edge. Elian stared as the spectrograph showed something impossible. Zero reflection. Zero emission. Not even gravitational lensing. It was not merely dark, it was the absence of any interaction with light or matter. It wasn't invisibility, it was exclusion. He recalibrated, cross-checked frequencies from infrared to gamma, even bounced neutrino pings across the zone. Nothing returned. Still, it was there. A wall of shadow with edges too precise, curvature too smooth, extending across light years. It didn't orbit. It didn't move like a construct. It just was. Desperate to know more, Elian deployed the observatory's only long-range drone. It would take 3 days to arrive, and its approach was automated. He loaded it with every sensor they had. When it reached the perimeter, its readings turned surreal. First, all sensors flatlined. Then, static. Then, only one image, sent seconds before signal loss. A surface impossibly smooth, stretching into black infinity. It wasn't made of metal or stone. It looked like lattice work, as though something had woven darkness into architecture. Its pattern rippled faintly, not from light, but from absence, shifting in rhythms too precise for randomness. And behind the lattice, something moved. Just a silhouette, vaguely humanoid, but scaled across kilometers, like the shadow of a statue cast by the dying light of a fleeing universe. It turned. The drone died. Elian stared at the last frame for hours, enhanced it, rotated it, ran motion analysis. What he found turned his stomach cold. The lattice was not just absorbing light, it was collecting it. Infrared patterns showed subtle inflections along the edges. Beams and arcs of stellar radiation funneled inward, captured like rain in a web. Each vanished star had fed into this thing, like fuel into a furnace, or offerings into a mouth. The black lattice wasn't just a wall, it was a vessel. And it wasn't drifting randomly through the galaxy. Its trajectory matched the curve of vanished systems, precisely. Where it passed, stars ceased to be. Elian considered the implications and nearly stopped breathing. It wasn't killing the stars. It was harvesting them. Not just for energy. That would be almost merciful. No, this was something else. Something more primal. The vessel was feeding. Across its infinite surface, it bore no symbols, no markings, no emission signatures. It defied every known physical law. And yet it behaved with terrible intelligence. It ignored the small, avoided planets, left matter intact. It only consumed stars, like an artist unmaking their canvas, sweeping clean the brush strokes of creation, or a god calling back its light. And then Elian heard something, not over the comms, not through the instruments, inside his own mind, a whisper, a shape of thought. You have seen me. In the aftermath of the drone's loss, the observatory's silence grew suffocating. Elian barely left the comms console, rerouting every receiver and long-range antenna to search for any trace, any echo of what he'd seen. He was no longer trying to understand the artifact, he was trying to understand what came before it. And then, the signals started arriving. They didn't come from nearby stations or colonies. Those had already gone dark. No, the signals came from outside the current edge of mapped space, from sectors once catalogued as dead zones, regions where civilizations had long since gone extinct or vanished without explanation. Each message came fragmented, scarred by time, warped by dust and drift. But they shared certain constants, carrier frequencies using ancient, near-universal harmonics. Distress pulses modulated through quantum entanglement. Some arrived encoded in formats no human system could natively read. Yet Elian's interface began reconstructing meaning through pattern recognition, cross-referencing syntax, tone, structure. And something emerged. Voices, thousands of them, some shrieking in pain, others whispering warnings in tongues older than Earth's oldest myths. A few simply sobbed, but the message across them all was clear. This thing had happened before, and it had always followed the same pattern. Light, then silence, then the echo, then nothing. One signal came with a symbol etched into its frame, a rotating spiral, curling inward infinitely. The AI tagged it as a recursive visual mnemonic, a code designed to implant itself into thought. Elian looked at it once and couldn't stop seeing it, even after blinking. It etched into his memory like a scar. The symbol appeared again and again, in different formats and systems, across thousands of signals. Some embedded it in their static. Others painted it with sound. One civilization had turned their final message into music, a slow, mournful chord progression layered with voices chanting in harmony, building to a crescendo, then collapsing into a single word spoken in 100 dialects at once. Run! Another signal arrived, a simple video file degraded nearly to uselessness. But in one restored frame, Elian saw what looked like a sky filled with stars, and then, over seconds, emptied. The stars didn't blink out all at once. They dimmed in order, forming a curve, a hand, a claw, a movement. But the worst came not from the newest signals, but the oldest. One message was so ancient, its origin was triangulated from a galaxy already gone, vanished from modern telescopes. Its language was unlike anything known. Yet Elian understood it, not through logic, not through translation, but as though someone whispered the meaning directly into his dreams. The message was short. They are not dead. They are fleeing. Elian sat in stunned silence as the implication buried itself in him like a needle. The stars were leaving. They weren't being consumed. They were retreating. His scientific mind rebelled. Stars didn't move like that. They couldn't. But then he remembered the artifact, the drone's image, the lattice. It didn't consume light. It held it, like a prison, or a net. A mind-shattering possibility dawned. What if the stars weren't just sources of energy? What if they were alive? Vast, slow-thinking intelligences that burned for eons, basking in the cosmos as sentient anchors of reality. And something had returned to the galaxy. Something so old, so terrifying. It had caused those great minds to recoil in unison, to leave behind their planets, their systems, even their children. A great retreat. The voice returned, not in sound, but in the space behind his thoughts. You see now, the lights you worshipped were never yours. The observatory lights flickered. Across his monitor, a new wave of darkness bloomed. Another dozen stars gone. Not dead, just gone. The deeper Elian delved into the fragmented transmissions, the more the truth unraveled. Terrifying, majestic, inescapable. A truth that reframed everything humanity thought it understood about the cosmos. It began with the final log from an alien probe, a derelict object drifting alone in the void between galaxies, its origin unknown, its makers extinct. The probe had been transmitting the same message on repeat, for over 1 million years, a data burst buried in radiation-hardened memory cells. No one had heard it until now. Elian decoded the packet. It wasn't a warning in the traditional sense. It was an explanation, or perhaps a eulogy. The beings who had sent it described a theory they called the stellar accord, a cosmic network beyond space and time, connecting all stars in a lattice of awareness. Stars, they wrote, are not inert fusion furnaces. They are awake, sentient, not in the fast mammalian way, but slow, vast, and ancient. Consciousness at stellar scale. They do not think in seconds or minutes. They dream in centuries, speak in the language of gravity and light. And they are bound together by something deeper than mass or radiation, something primordial, a covenant, a collective memory, a shared vigilance. And then, they said, something changed. The void, the black between galaxies, was never empty. It was asleep, and something inside it had begun to stir. No telescope had ever seen it, no signal had mapped it. Because it was not an object, it was a presence, and it had begun to move. The probe's last transmissions showed entire sectors of stars dimming in perfect sequence, systems falling dark, not from death, but by choice. The stars were leaving, not consumed, not destroyed, evacuated, like frightened animals in retreat. Light by light, they dimmed themselves and disappeared into dimensions or realms unknown, far beyond the edge of what even ancient physics could describe. The message concluded with one phrase, etched in all known languages and several unknown ones. We do not resist it. We remember. Elian sat motionless, letting the weight of it crush him. This was not just happening now. This was not new. It was a cycle, a tide. The stars had fled before, across multiple epochs, countless galaxies. Civilizations had been caught in the path and erased without ever understanding what was coming. Because the stars never screamed. They only withdrew. And now, in this spiral arm of this modest galaxy, the retreat had begun again. On Earth, humanity still clung to its illusions of progress. But Elian knew the truth. He had seen the pattern, read the thoughts of civilizations long dead. He had glimpsed the lattice, the accord, and now it was breaking. One by one, the lights above him blinked out, and then something moved, not on his sensors, not on his screens, but across the sky itself. A ripple, a shape, a will. And in that moment, Elian understood. This thing that approached was not a predator. It was not evil. It was something more terrifying. It was inevitable, a correction, a reclamation, the end of a lease that had never been signed. The stars had known, and so they had fled. Only their echoes remained, and Elian, alone in an ancient observatory, orbiting a dead world on the edge of knowing, had become the last to understand. The Great Retreat was not panic. It was ceremony. A final bow before the curtain fell. Elian no longer slept. He no longer needed to. There was no night or day in the observatory's orbit, no sunrise to signal waking, no sunset to close his eyes. Only the constant darkness and the subtle, horrifying realization that the darkness itself was changing, growing heavier, not just in absence of light, but in presence of something else, something that didn't belong. And now, even that darkness was beginning to move. He stared through the main viewport, the ancient lens systems of the observatory slowly tracking across the galactic plane. For years, they had offered breathtaking views, nebulae blooming in vibrant hues, stars glittering across the disk like jewels. Now, that vision was failing. The sky was vanishing piece by piece, as if someone were pulling a shroud over it. The stars weren't just dimming, They were leaving in a pattern, sequential, deliberate, one every few minutes. And whatever was following, whatever was pushing them away, was no longer hiding. Elian saw it first, not with his eyes, but with his instincts. A wrongness, a ripple across perception, a patch of the sky that didn't quite match, even in void. A shape that shouldn't exist, but did. And it was crawling. Between stars, through the gaps, across the spiral arms of the galaxy like ink on a canvas. It had form, but not a shape. Structure, but not mass. It moved like a thought given direction. A command written across space-time. And worse, it was looking back. Elian froze, his breath trapped somewhere between lungs and throat, his skin crawling with the sensation of being seen. Not observed, not scanned, but truly seen, as if the thing understood him in an instant, in totality. He staggered back from the viewport and stumbled to the telemetry panel. He pulled live data, everything he could: trajectory predictions, star activity, heat maps, radiation scans. The system choked on the volume. The servers began to overheat. It didn't matter. Nothing on the monitors could explain what he'd witnessed. Because it wasn't made of particles or waves, it didn't emit light or gravity. It was anti-presence, a force not meant to be catalogued by instruments, but felt in the bones, in dreams, in dread. The cameras outside the observatory flickered. Elian's face, reflected in a dark screen, seemed to shift, age and youth warping, identities unraveling in a stuttering blur of light. He rushed to the comms terminal. He had to speak. Someone might still be listening. Broadcast emergency message. Encrypted channel. Full bandwidth. The machine beeped. He stared into the camera. This is Elian Voss, interstellar surveyor, observatory station 13 Chi. I don't know who's left to hear this. I don't know how much time I have. But I've seen it. I've seen it. He tried to steady his voice, but the words came fractured. They're not dying. They're running. The stars. They're retreating. I think they're scared of something old, something older than time. It's moving now. It's awake. It's coming this way. He looked up at the ceiling, then back at the lens. You think you're alone out there, drifting in a sea of light. But you're not. The sea just went quiet. And now, something's walking across it. His throat tightened. The lights around him flickered, then dimmed permanently. I think it saw me. And still, from the viewport, Elian could see it, crawling ever closer, weaving through the emptying sky like a weaver threading a tapestry of oblivion. A mindless force, or perhaps worse, one with purpose. A purpose they had never been meant to witness. Not gods, not monsters, just something else. Something that had waited. And the stars, in their collective wisdom, had chosen to flee rather than fight. Elian watched one more star vanish, then another. The rhythm was unmistakable now, like breathing, like a heartbeat, each one closer, each one colder. And he stood there, silent, eyes wide, a single point of awareness in a galaxy going dark. The last observer, the final witness. The observatory's systems were failing. Power fluctuations now rolled through the control room like tides, each wave dimmer than the last. Emergency lights buzzed in short, sporadic bursts, strobing Elian's shadow against the curved walls, as if the station itself were gasping for breath. He moved slowly, not because of fatigue, but because haste felt pointless. The urgency had evaporated, replaced with a profound, hushed reverence, like walking through the nave of a cathedral just before it collapsed. Every light that vanished from the sky was not just a data point lost. It was a farewell. A voice silenced. Elian sat at the main communications console. Most of the subspace relays were already dark. Whatever force was moving through the galaxy had not only scattered the stars but silenced their songs. No signal traffic, no chatter, just static and decay. Only the main directional burst antenna still functioned, connected to a backup capacitor bank and pointed squarely at Earth, or where Earth should be. He checked the timestamp. The delay would be massive, centuries, even millennia, before this signal reached anyone, if anyone still existed. Still, he had to try. He leaned into the console's mic, the glow of the status lights painting his face in pale red and dying gold. His voice cracked from disuse, dry and barely audible at first, then steadying with resolve. This is Elian Voss, transmitting from Observatory Station 13 Chi, in orbit around rogue planet Virilan X, Galactic Sector 118 Delta. A long pause. If this message reaches you, I am likely the last observer, the last voice left in the dark. He looked toward the viewport. The stars had almost all gone now. The last few hung on the edge of sight, like embers at the end of a dying fire. They didn't burn out. They didn't explode. They left. I know how that sounds, but I swear, I saw them go. In sequence, in fear, not of something behind them, but something before them, something older than the void, older than time. His throat tightened, and he wiped his face with a trembling hand. We always thought the stars were our ancestors, our silent guardians, that they burned for us, but we were never part of their story. We were the accident, the noise in their quiet. And now, the light's gone. Whatever scared them enough to flee, it's here. A flicker passed through the lights above him, a tremor through the deck plates. The observatory creaked like a sinking ship. Elian continued, his voice now barely more than a whisper. Earth, if you're still there, run, hide, don't look up. The signal timer began its countdown. Because the light wasn't our beacon. It wasn't a gift. It was a warning. He stared straight into the lens, pupils dilated, reflecting the growing shadow that had begun to crawl along the outer hull. And now, the warning is over. The transmission ended. The station's core hummed as the last surge of power funneled into the antenna. The beam lanced into the cosmos, a single thread of defiance trailing into the dark. Behind him, through the viewport, the final star blinked out. Elian turned slowly. The blackness outside wasn't just absence, it was layered, dimly writhing, folded in geometries his mind refused to grasp. At the center of that abyss, something stirred. A limb, a tendril, a thought, or an eye. It opened without opening. No iris, no pupil. Just a widening, luminous slit in the dark, like reality itself had split to let something else peer through. It looked at him, not with hatred, not with curiosity, but with recognition, as if to say, "You saw me, and that makes you part of me now." The station's power died completely. All lights off. One last breath in the dark. And then, blackness. The void swallowed the observatory whole. No more hums or clicks, only silence, thick and absolute. The vast emptiness outside was no longer a canvas of stars, but a black ocean stretching infinitely in every direction. The rogue planet Virilan X, once a sentinel in the darkness, vanished from the viewport, consumed in shadows too deep to comprehend. Inside the station, the emergency lights flickered one last time, casting long, trembling shadows over Elian's still figure slumped at the console. His eyes, glassy and distant, reflected the eerie glow of the dead screens. He was gone, consumed by the weight of the final moment, or perhaps taken by the incomprehensible presence that now haunted the emptiness. But as darkness filled every corner, something new awakened. In the reflection of the main control screen, where the stars once danced and the galaxies spun, a different light emerged. It was not the cold fire of a distant sun, nor the shimmering glimmer of far-off worlds. It was an eye. Large and unblinking, this eye hovered in the void, ancient and immense. Its surface rippled like liquid obsidian, yet within its depths, galaxies swirled and collapsed, shadows shifting like clouds across its iris. It watched with a patient, terrible calm, as if it had waited an eternity for this moment. The eye blinked slowly, and the darkness breathed, a vast, living pulse emanating from the depths of the cosmos itself. The last visible star, once a brilliant beacon of hope and life, winked out in silent surrender. A whisper echoed through the void, a voice older than time and space, cutting through the silence like a knife. They were never dying. They were leaving us behind. Then the screen went black. No light, no sound, only the cold, eternal dark. And somewhere, in the vastness beyond comprehension, the eye opened wider, ready to watch the new silence.